know what tomorrow brings. There's not a day that you have not seen. So in all things be my life bread. I honor you, O Lord, nothing less. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't hear the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. You are my strength and comfort. You are my steady hand. You are my firm foundation. The rock on which I stand. Your ways are always higher. Your plans are always good. There's not a place where I go. You already stood. When you don't move the mountains, I'm needing you to move. When you don't part the waters, I wish I could walk through. When you don't give the answers as I cry out to you, I will trust, I will trust, I will trust in you. I will trust in you. I will trust in you. Thank you. Sorry about the technical difficulties getting off the ground there. Can you put up the scripture, please? I know, it's so easy. So this morning we're going to be reading one of my favorite scriptures because I got two kids, so. Our scripture this morning comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 10. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. And where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. So I thought that was fitting, leading into my message. I'm here to talk about I'm actually going to talk about both trips that I've gone to Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic, in March of this year, and then also in March of last year. So my second year at Miami University, my academic advisor emailed me to suggest a spring break trip to the Dominican Republic with a nonprofit started by an alumnus of our Latin American Studies department, who is now one of my dearest friends. But I made it pretty clear my freshman year that I was at Miami to get a degree and graduate early. Spending time abroad was costly, and it seemed impossible when I was carrying such a full credit load. However, this trip was different. It was only a week during spring break. What made the deal even more perfect was that flying to the Dominican Republic entailed much less time in an airplane than flying to South America. The The trip cost was affordable, and when I met with the program director, she quickly earned my trust. Everywhere I looked for reasons not to go on the trip, I found encouragement and more reasons why I should go on the trip. So the first day of spring break, I found myself flying to a foreign country I'd never been to, with a backpack full of library books that I totally meant to read, but somehow never found the time to. But I had them. So my first trip down to the DR was life-changing. I'll never forget the ride from the airport to the apartment we were staying in. I was wide-eyed like a child. I couldn't get enough of every small detail. The salty humid air in my face, the palm trees lining the ocean, and the sound of bachata blaring from oncoming cars. So we spent the first day exploring San Francisco, climbing in and out of caves, drinking coffee at street-side shops, and gazing in awe at the first and only Gothic cathedral in the Western Hemisphere, which is pictured up there. We worshipped in a small, cramped, one-room church of God, surrounded by passion and zest of worship I'd never seen before. People danced, sang, cried, and embraced each other, all the while worshiping. They were eager to introduce themselves to us after worship and welcome us to their church. The real fun, however, started on Monday morning when we arrived at Villa Padrino School in Santo Domingo. So my first trip, we spent the week on the second floor doing construction work. We were grinding the cement walls and painting them with white primer to prepare for a team of artists to come in and paint them to make them the beautiful colors that they are now. The work was hard. We finished the day sore, sunburned, and dirty with dust from the walls and a soccer field, which we spent hours on. One of our team members even earned the nickname Sucio Hermano, or Dirty Brother,
after he drew the attention of locals in the supermarket in his white t-shirt covered in dirt and white paint all over his hair. 2 years later, he still carries that nickname. So we spent our downtime with kids on the playground. We spent hours pushing them on the swing set and chasing them around the soccer field. We taught them words in English, and they taught us more phrases in Spanish. But the week flew by, and before we knew it, the second floor was painted, and our missionary host, David, was reviewing the agenda to make it to the airport on Sunday. Before our wheels touched down in Miami, I already knew that I needed to go back. I just wasn't sure how. But the opportunity came a year later to go back to the same city, the same apartment, and the same school of kids. The price, however, had gone up significantly. But with the support of the church and my family, I was able to raise funds and found myself once again on a plane to Santo Domingo with 3 close friends who'd served on the first trip alongside me. The second trip from the airport to the apartment felt like coming home. Church members remembered my name, and I could still find my way around the supermarket next to our apartment building. Returning to the school on Monday morning was the best part of the homecoming. The preschoolers, or the tinies, as we lovingly called them, came running off the playground to say hi and give hugs. I felt like I didn't know any of the kids, but I did. I just didn't recognize so many of them because they'd gotten so big in the year since I'd seen them. So we spent that week teaching English, and we taught them to brush their teeth and to floss, and through kind donations, we were able to give all of the kids their own toothbrush, and you thought we'd given them a kidney. They were so excited, showing off their toothbrushes to each other and brushing their teeth during recess. And we, like I said, we worked with them on their English, and we also spent a significant amount of time combing lice out of the little girl's hair. So it was a much different type of service. But unfortunately, our week was cut short because we were there the week before Semana Santa, or Holy Week, the week before Easter. So the kids had that week off for their spring break. So that Friday, their spring break started. So we only had 4 days instead of 5, which we had planned on having. So once again on Friday, we were grinding walls and painting them, just like the first time. And then it was Saturday, and at 6 a.m., we found ourselves at the airport boarding a plane to come home. The first time I left, it was like leaving a part of myself behind. But the second time I left, I was filled with this strange peacefulness, and I quickly launched myself back into the hustle of senior year. So I think perhaps the best way to capture the lessons that I learned in my time in the Dominican Republic is to share with you the memories as I recall them, in small snapshots of big moments. These memories are from both of my trips, last spring and this spring. Of course, they are only small pieces of the ministry that is happening in Santo Domingo, but in the essence of time, I'll try to remain brief. So, snapshot 1, I want to talk to you about Alonzo. Also, just fair note, I have changed the names of the kids for privacy, so don't worry about me standing up here saying kids' names. So I want to talk to you about Alonzo. During my first trip, I had trouble connecting with the kids at first. As a Latin American studies major, I had read countless articles detailing the moral dilemma of the white savior and short-term mission trips that end up doing more harm than good. I was afraid to attach and build relationships with the children because I might never see them again. So I found myself spreading myself thin amongst the kids to avoid bonding too much with any of them. Side note on terminology here. Urban Dictionary defines white saviorism as Western people going in to fix the problems of struggling nations or people of color without understanding their history, needs, or the region's current state of affairs. This can also appear as voluntourism, in which wealthy Westerners go on mission trips in place of vacations. Oftentimes, this mentality is problematic because it lends to an attitude of saving others when we're called to serve others. To avoid this, at the nonprofit that I go down with, we carry in our donations while the kids are in class so they don't see that the clothes and the medicine come from the Americans. See, the worst thing that we could do is to be teaching these kids that it's the Americans who provide for them. It's not. We're the hands by which God provides for these children, and it's our job to teach the kids that God is the one who's always going to be there to provide. So on Wednesday morning, back to Alonzo, I found myself at a swing set, a place I'd spent many hours. I was pushing a little boy named Alonzo, responding to his cries of más alto, or higher. At the top of the arc after one of my pushes, Alonzo, for no clear reason, let go and fell off the swing. I ran to him after he fell, and he reached for me to pick him up. I carried him to the bottom of the slide where I sat and rocked him, murmuring in Spanish to calm him down. Every time I went to set him down, he started crying again, and I was afraid that he might actually really be hurt. After 10 minutes or so, Alonzo was up and ready to go again. This time, he asked Will to push him. As one of only 2 young men on our service team, Will, or Sucio Hermano, was very popular on the swing set, as the little boys craved the attention of male role models. I watched Alonzo interacting with Will, and then once again I saw him let go of the swing and fall. Will had the same reaction I did the first time. However, I noticed something different. Alonzo ceased crying as soon as Will wrapped his arms around him. And then it hit me. The little boy knew how to use the swing, but he also knew that getting hurt would reward him with physical touch. This upset me so much. As a social worker, I am no stranger to children with boundary issues or rough home lives. What bothered me so much about this situation was that I had no idea what his home life was like. If he had a mother to comfort him when he cried, surely my holding and rocking him was inappropriate. I was not his mother. However, when I expressed these concerns to my team, they had a simple answer. Do it anyway. We don't know what these kids are going home to, but we know them, and we can love them. Just love them. And this changed my attitude completely. From that point on, I made the decision to love these children regardless of how hard it would be to leave them. And I am still so glad that I made that decision. So my next snapshot is about a little girl named Gladia. So my second trip to the Dominican Republic, I got the chance to serve the kids a little more directly, as I'd said. So Monday afternoon, I found myself in this little barber shop adjacent to the soccer field. The barber was closed on weekdays, so he allowed us to use the shop to shampoo and comb lice out of the little girl's hair. I would venture to say that more girls had lice than didn't have lice. and their fascination with braiding each other's hair only made the problem worse. The girls even had a little nursery rhyme they would chant while we combed their hair, to the effect of, "I have lice. They won't leave me alone. They bite me here, they bite me there, and if I give them to you, then you have them." Whatever makes it better. The little girl who arguably had the worst case of lice was named Gladia. Her poor scalp was covered, and she had thick, beautiful hair crawling in lice. We shampooed and combed and combed and combed, and I know that it had to hurt, but she was so content to just sit there and have her hair combed. I asked her if it hurt, and she told me that it didn't, but I have a strong suspicion she was just comforting me. As we combed her hair, not only did lice appear on the combs in our hands, but dirt also ran down our fingers. As it turns out, Gladia had a home, but her mom didn't pay much attention to her and rarely washed the little girl's hair. So, of course it hurt, but the comfort of having a woman washing her hair was something that Gloria needed so bad. So we spent hours combing and washing her hair. We talked about it later that night in the apartment after dinner. We thought that combing lice out of hair wasn't so unlike Jesus washing feet. Feet are dirty and gross, and lice are creepy and gross. But sometimes we all need someone to kneel beside us and help us with our dirtiest and most unclean things. And this is a poem I wrote entitled Gloria's Hair. When Jesus washes our feet, he loves the parts of us that are the most unclean. The purest form of love requires that we get our hands dirty. So my next snapshot is from this trip. So we had a talent show for the kids on our last day in the school before Semana Santa. So the kids were invited to share their projects and do skits from the Bible and skits from history class. The teachers also asked the Americans if we would perform during the talent show. I agreed to play piano for the children, but asked if I could have a couple days to practice the piece since I was playing from memory. One morning during recess, I snuck into the cafeteria to practice on the keyboard plugged in the back. Of course, the sound drew kids into the room to watch. Soon, little hands were all over the keyboard, and someone found the button that starts playing techno beats, a feature on most keyboards that I've yet to find a use for, other than mortifying musicians who accidentally hit it during a performance. Guilty. However, as soon as the beat started, the kids started dancing, so I didn't have the heart to turn it off. It was pretty loud, so more and more children were coming to the cafeteria to see what was going on, and they too would join the dance party. Pretty soon, it drew the attention of the school principal, Romulo. Busted. Instead of turning it off, however, Romulo turned it up, and the dancing continued. Pretty soon, most of the second and third graders and our entire team were dancing around the cafeteria, still to the same techno beat that had started about 15 minutes earlier. I can't even describe the pure joy that we were feeling in that moment. So at one point, a little girl reaches for me to pick her up. So I did, and we danced. After a couple minutes, she threw her arms around my neck and said, "Somos amigas para siempre?" Or, "Are we friends forever?" And I said, "Mejores amigas," best friends. Then it occurred to me that I didn't know her name. She told me, and then asked what my name was. I told her, and she hugged me, saying, "Te amo, Carolina." Her name was Gracia, or Grace. This seemed like such an obvious connection in my mind for how much I'd grown in the past year. From the young woman who was afraid to connect with the kids because of how hard it would make leaving, to the woman who told a child that she had just met, "I love you," and meant it. The only word I can think of to describe the differences between who I was on that first trip and who I was on the second trip, you guessed it, grace. Next snapshot. So our last day on the second trip was spent doing construction work since the kids didn't have school that day. However, some kids still lingered around the school because their parents were working. One of these was a little girl that I had struck quite the bond with. My nickname for her was Pajarita, or Little Bird. Pajarita enjoyed grinding the walls with us, but she mostly enjoyed playing in the dust and talking while we worked. At one point, the rest of the room went up to the roof to hang out. But Pajarita couldn't come because she was 8. And she was clearly upset about being left out. So I decided to stay on the ground floor with her. We talked, giggled, and took terribly close-up selfies on my camera. After a while, she pulled my Bible out of my backpack, the one that the church had given me for my high school graduation. She asked me to read it to her, but of course she doesn't speak English, so I had to read a few lines in English and then translate it to Spanish and give her a quick summary, which also turned out to be great because the section that she picked was one of those odd sections of the Bible that we don't often read, so it needed a little editing. After a few minutes of reading, she took my hand and asked me to pray with her. She prayed in Spanish, and it was beautiful. She prayed for safe travels for the Americans and that they would come back to visit and we would all be friends. Then I prayed in English. I prayed for Pajarita and her faith journey. Halfway through my prayer, she stops me and asks, "Why do you pray so long?" And I told her, "Because I have a lot to talk to God about. He's my best friend." To which she responds, "Oh no, you don't have any friends." I laughed and told her, "No, I have friends in America, I promise." This is probably one of the strongest memories that I have from that second trip. Getting to share my faith with Pajarita, even though she's too young to completely understand it yet. Because maybe I'm still too young to completely understand it, and that's okay. So arriving in the Dominican Republic certainly brought with it some culture shock, but this also allowed me to critically examine the culture of faith that I had grown up in. When I try to think of a word to summarize what the faith I have observed in my Dominican friends, I can only think of one word: grateful. When I get the chance to worship alongside congregants in Santo Domingo, they worship with their entire bodies and souls. They dance and sing with hands in the air and cry out how much they love God. Even when things are rough and there isn't enough to go around, they're so grateful for what they have. Even if they have a few pesos in their pocket, they come up with something to place in the offering basket. When I told Pajarita goodbye at the end of the first trip, I told her that God loved her, and she said, "Yes, I already know that." And truly, she had no doubt in her heart when she said it. I think that oftentimes we're guilty of feeling entitled as Christians to living good lives. We think that we're good people and we don't deserve the bad things that happen to us. Honestly, we probably don't, but we're so quick to shift the blame to God and become angry with him when things don't go our way. We get so caught up in what we think we should have that we pay no attention to the good things that God has already given us. We see God as a deliverer of justice instead of a parent who grieves alongside us when bad things happen. That is how my time in the Dominican Republic has shaped my view of God. I have no doubt in my mind that we serve a God who celebrates good things with us and mourns the evil in the world as we do. My first team in the Dominican Republic also radically changed my perspective. The difference between the rest of the team and me was that I had grown up in a congregation of mostly adults, spending time with mostly adults. Growing up, I had always pictured and spoken to God as some higher authority, demanding respect. And honestly, I was afraid to pray because I thought I was doing it wrong. My friends, however, were involved in Young Life and Campus Crusades for Christ, and they had a very different approach to faith. Rather than talking to God like some scary authority figure, they spoke to God like a parent or a friend. They taught me new adjectives about God. They taught me that God's love was forgiving, even when we were angry or stubborn and disobedient. They taught me that God's love was silly. When I look at the night sky now, I see a God whose love is so silly that there is an entire solar system that exists for God to paint pictures in the sky for us. When the salt water dries my hair, I think about the wide varieties of playgrounds that God has made for us in mountains, oceans, beaches, and jungles. Mostly, they taught me that God's love was reckless. God loves us without abandon, and we should love others the way that God has loved us. God's love is reckless, and ours should be too. Thank you.